Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we are looking at another brand new Panasonic camera. This is the LUMIX S1 Mark II. Now, yes, you probably remember just a few months ago we were looking at the S1R Mark II, and that was a fantastic camera. High resolution, hybrid approach, it kind of dominated both photo and video. But here we have something a little different. This carries over pretty much all of the features except for one thing. The differentiating factor here is a 24 megapixel partially stacked sensor design, and that means you see speed increases across the board. That starts with a 3.5 times faster readout from the sensor, and that goes all downstream to things like an increased burst rate mode, up to 70 FPS with the electronic shutter. You get a dedicated 96 FPS mode with continuous autofocus, and you get other things like an improved DR boost mode. Now, as you can see, this looks pretty much identical to the S1R Mark II from the body on the outside. That includes the screen, the EVF, the battery, the media, and that also means that you get a lot of the processing options, but there are some new features here as well. Starting with a new autofocus mode that's intended to capture very unpredictable and kinetic movements on camera, especially if there's a crowd that's watching. And what I mean by that is, as you can see, we're in a dance studio, and I'm gonna do this entirely run and gun. So totally handheld, all autofocus, and with a brand new lens. This is the LUMIX S 24 to 60mm f2.8, and yes, not really the most common focal range out there, but it gets you a smaller, lighter design for a body like this. It means it's more nimble. So I'm gonna save the details of the recording modes, the photo burst modes, and some of the autofocus details for later. Plus, this isn't the only camera we're gonna talk about today. So stay tuned and let's get started. So Panasonic always puts a ton of resolution and frame rate options into their cameras. We've done this quite a few times before, so I'm gonna try to be really quick with this, just showing you some of the options we have here. Right off the bat, let me just explain. 6K open gate 3x2 goes up to 30 FPS. If you look here in the quick menu, you can see it's second to the top. Top being just 30p, but we want to shoot 24. I love that they give you the preview here, but I want to actually just filter out the results for you today because there's so many of them, and it would take us forever to get through it all. So what I'm going to do is go into the full menu and filter the results. So let's do that. If we go and filter instead by resolution, which gives us the ratios, this is where things get interesting. So like I said, top of the order is the 3x2 open gate. Then we have this brand new 2.4:1 mode. And now this is really interesting because this does technically give you the highest horizontal resolution, I guess, in that it's 6K, but it is very cropped to 2.4:1. So I'm going to choose that one. And as you can see, this is a full readout. Normally, yes, I would suggest you use OpenGate and do this in post, but it is really cool to have this on board if you want to natively shoot this way, if you want to commit to that framing instead of doing it with guides. So back in the filter, I'm gonna scroll down a bit. We've seen a lot of these options before, 5.9 and 5.8K, but this is the other new one, 5.1K, also OpenGate 3x2. I'm gonna filter for that. And that gets us up to 60 FPS. Now this has full autofocus support, continuous, and this gets us the full readout technically. So it is oversampled from 6K. Just because it says 5.1 doesn't mean there's any line skipping or pixel binning here. Now one more thing we need to show you real quick is if we filter again down to Cinema 4K 17:9 mode. This is where things get a little interesting for me. We're gonna go into that and hit OK. Now, you'll see at the top here we have 120 FPS. But below that, we actually have a new 96 FPS mode. This is a native frame rate, so you do get sync sound with it, and even better, you get continuous autofocus. Now what's interesting here is you can see that his reflection is actually in the mirror, but it is never getting distracted. So it's always staying on the actual subject, not anything else around. And we're gonna test that more later on. So anyway, we're gonna roll a little bit with the 5.1K open gate 60 FPS mode, and then the Cinema 4K 17:9 96 FPS mode, and show a little bit of both. We're gonna get a lot of beautiful, smooth slow motion here, and I'm so excited that we're gonna have full autofocus the whole time. So about the autofocus. Well, most of the improvements do actually come from the S1 II that we looked at just a few months ago, but there is something new here, and that's what Panasonic calls their urban sports autofocus mode. And what that's tailored towards is basically unpredictable movement, fast-paced movement, kinetic action, things where you really can't predict how the subject is going to go. It's not like a traditional sport where maybe you can follow them as they go across the field. This is something much more obstructive of the face. It often involves crowds that form around the subject, which is one of the key features of that mode. So I wish I could say we had a crowd with us today, but we tried our best here. We got the crew from the shoot to go behind our subject, and just for one shot, we looked to see if the camera would ever drift away from the subject and onto the bystanders, the people looking on. I can at least say that if you look at the behind the scenes footage, watch the tracker. It almost never moves off the subject. It always stays locked on our dancer. And yeah, it worked remarkably well, I have to say. Now, the second thing we really leaned on here was the new cropless IS mode. This is an electronic IS, so this comes after the in-body stabilization, which is wonderful here, as always, on Panasonic cameras. And this gives you exactly what it says. It's cropless, so you get the entire sensor image, which, you know, if you have full frame, you really want to keep as much of that as you can. So I only used the cropless mode. I stayed handheld the entire time, and I thought it held up pretty well. And then there's one more video feature that is really driven by the increase in the sensor speed here, and that's the improvement to the DR boost mode. DR boost has been around on some Panasonic cameras for quite some time now. It basically combines the dual gain circuitry into an image that has even more dynamic range. And in this case, we now hit 15 stops of dynamic range, which is actually the highest of any LUMIX camera ever. Now, there are some caveats to this. Because it is combining those, it does limit the video frame rate to a maximum of 25 FPS, and it is recommended to be used only on static shots or things that are fairly stationary. So if you're shooting, for example, a wide vista or horizon, this could be the way that you get some nice cloud coverage, for example. We didn't use it here because, as you can see, we're moving around a lot, so it didn't really make sense. Plus, I needed to go with those higher frame rates, but it's there if you need it. Now, this may not be the hybrid resolution beast that the S1 II is, but it's still an amazing photography camera. And really, if you want speed, that's what you get here. So 70 FPS in the electronic shutter burst modes. And I think I was able to buffer about 180 images on each exposure. So that gave me 2.5 seconds roughly of capture for each movement, which looked great. When we wanted to strike a pose, it just looked so dynamic and razor sharp. The autofocus locked on beautifully. Because I was able to crank the ISO, which by the way, the second circuit now is 5000, I was able to also crank the shutter speed, which means every shot was razor sharp. One more interesting photo detail is that the camera is actually Godox certified. So Godox flash triggers are rated to work with the same reliability of a first-party flash. And so yes, we did grab a Godox flash trigger and a Godox 8100. If you really want to freeze those dramatic moments, especially with someone who can bust moves like this, you got to go with a flash. For our lens today, as I said before, we stuck entirely with the new LUMIX S 24-60mm f2.8. Untraditional size, I know, but it does keep the lens size itself and the weight down, which with this body works wonderfully. Like I said, I've been handheld all day, and it's nice to just have something that I can be nimble with. Now, I could see some people missing the extra 10mm from the traditional 24-70, but I think the trade-off is more than worth it. But what's really new here is the dual phase linear motor. That is what drives the lens's autofocus, and it is very fast, very responsive. Even moments during our burst photography, for example, I was able to capture changes in depth with our subject, which was really nice to see. And you'll notice that we have a custom function button here and a custom lens ring, which allows you to do things, for example, like enabling digital zoom through the button and then doing the digital zoom through the ring. Now, I did mention in the very beginning that we have another camera to talk about, right? Well, it's very similar to the S1 II. In fact, it's actually called the S1 Mark IIe. Now, it's almost exactly the same spec for spec, except for one key difference, and that is it is not a partially stacked sensor. So it is still 24 megapixels. It's got essentially the same body design, and it's got almost all of the same features on the software level. Now, what you do lose, of course, are things that are driven by that sensor speed. So for example, you don't have the 96 FPS modes. You don't have the 5.1K 60 FPS, and you don't have the DR boost up to 15 stops. You also drop down to 30 FPS in burst mode. So you're not gonna see the 70 FPS here, but again, you get pretty much the exact same type of camera, same resolution, same autofocus ability, same subject detection modes, and even the 2.4:1 crop modes. So you get a lot of the same video recording flexibility here. Even things like ProRes RAW, for example, it's all here and in the S1 IIe. You're probably wondering, where exactly does the S1 II, the IIe, the S1 R2, and yes, even the S5 II and 2X sit in the lineup overall? Well, the S5 II and 2X are not going away, don't worry. The S1 R2, of course, is the resolution beast. That is the higher resolution 8K hybrid camera. So if you're looking for that commercial level hybrid use, you gotta go there. Now, if you want kind of the fastest in terms of sensor speed and burst modes, then you're looking at the S1 II. Feature set wise, they're pretty much identical. The body is the same, the chassis, the cooling, the recording modes, all the same, aside obviously from the 8K versus 6K. And the 2E is basically this minus a lot of the speed driven benefits. Now versus the S5 II and 2X, one of the things you get right off the bat is very obvious, is you get CF Express Type B recording here. So you have a faster recording medium, which gives you things like internal RAW recording as well. You lose things like Cinelike A2, the LUMIX Lab support, and also some of the video recording modes with the S5 II and 2X. But of course, they still remain fantastic cameras. Just know what your needs are, and you'll be able to find yourself something within the Panasonic LUMIX family. One more detail, I promise. There are firmware updates coming to the S1R2 and eventually to the S1 II as well. Notably, for these cameras, you're gonna see the RE Log C3 support that we saw way back with the GH7 over a year ago. That's coming to all three. So that's coming as a separate paid update, and that gives you access to RE Log C3, which if you have seen that in use, it's a great workflow for colorists or cinematographers who want to integrate it with an RE Cinema camera. So very unique thing to see across the line here. For the S1R2, we're gonna now see RAW over HDMI. Big one here, OpenGate 8.1K, UVC support, timecode sync via Bluetooth, which is something that we didn't even get to talk about with the S1 II, HEIF support. The Urban Sports Autofocus will come to the S1R2 as well. The control ring assignment that I described here will also come there. And then transfer between storage devices, which I didn't get to talk about, but basically this camera allows you to transfer files back and forth between SSDs and the internal media. So that's it for our time with Panasonic's LUMIX S1 Mark II and the 24 to 60mm f2.8. It was really nice to be able to trust the autofocus here, especially cranking up to 96 FPS. And as always, I love shooting OpenGate. It's just so flexible. So let us know how you could use the S1 Mark II in your next production. I'm Doug with B&H, and I'll see you next time.